But before that, we've got a pretty cool location to spend a little bit of time. We're going to spend some time with Daniel Kinka. He is a restoration ecologist at American Prairie Reserve. His work is focused on restoring wildlife at the American Prairie Reserve and the affiliated Wild Sky Ranches, as well as acting as a liaison to the neighbors, NGOs, government agencies, and other external entities. So he joined the American Prairie Reserve in 2018, shortly after completing his doctoral degree in ecology at Utah State University, where he studied the use of livestock guardian dogs to promote coexistence between large carnivores and ranchers. And him and I are fellow fellows. We were fellow fellows together at the National Geographic Society. So let's bring Daniel in with us. Hey, Daniel, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Joe?
Good. Good to see you. Looks like it's maybe warming up, but it's not quite there yet out on the prairie.
You know, it was 80 degrees on Monday, and now it's about 36. So it's always been a land of extremes, and it's not disappointing tonight.
All right, good stuff. Well, thanks for braving the elements. These are nice and short and sweet, so we won't keep you out for too long. You still hear me, Daniel? Daniel, can you hear me? All right. Sometimes when you're in a place that's a little bit remote, sometimes the signal doesn't always cooperate. So let's see if it clears back up for us, or if Daniel does an exit and come back in. Sometimes that can help clear things up. We do have a really great video to play highlighting the Prairie Reserve. So if it doesn't clear up in the next minute or so, I'm going to play that video, and then we'll see how things are looking from there. We'll give things another moment. All right, I'm going to play the video, and then we'll cross our fingers that we get a little Prairie Reserve action after that. Here we go. Oh, that's a good sign. He left the call. So hopefully that means he's coming back in. I might just wait another second, because if he comes back in, it'll probably be a good signal to start. Yeah. Daniel, we lost you.
I'm back. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Yeah, you're coming through loud and clear. Can you hear?
Well, did we? Good. I don't know. Did you want to start with that video, Joe?
Let's do it. I was just about to do it in case we didn't see you for another minute or two. So here we go. Video's coming up and launched.
What I want my son to learn is that people need nature and we can live in harmony with it. This project is only one of 4 places where we can save a temperate grassland, one of the least protected ecosystems in the world. We are losing a lot of wild places in the world, and what we're providing is a wild place for people to come out.
American Prairie Reserve is in a region that has been shaped by wildlife and people for millennia. We have a chance to preserve and protect that for the generations that follow us.
It would be the largest wildlife reserve in the continental United States, roughly the size of Connecticut or equivalent to Yellowstone National Park and Glacier National Park put together.
This project brings together diverse people from diverse backgrounds who all can make an individual contribution to the building of American Prairie Reserve.
I'm a wildlife researcher. I'm very passionate about what I do. I'm out here because I wanted to be in a pristine place. I wanted to be part of a big project that has a meaning, not only to my small research, but globally something that's much bigger than me.
National Geographic has named American Prairie Reserve as one of their last wild places. So we're not just doing wildlife restoration, ecosystem restoration here for the sake of this landscape. We're actually doing it to serve as a model for the world.
They're both adult females, right?
The gaze is forward. The projection is forward.
On the right?
This is a modern vision of modern humanity living alongside and coexisting with big, robust, healthy populations of wildlife.
Wanting to create a spot where the world is welcome. It's monumental, it's brave, and to watch people realize, almost look like they accidentally found something they didn't even know that they were looking for.
This place is a living, breathing entity already. We are not waiting for this place to be fully assembled in order to welcome the public to come out and enjoy it.
When I come out here, I do get very inspired. Protecting this land, not just here, but everywhere around the world, is important.
This is a project of national and global importance that we at American Prairie Reserve cannot do alone. And it's a vital part of what our country will be for generations to come.
All right, let's get Daniel back in here. Hey, Daniel.
Hey, Joe. I'm as close to the Wi-Fi router as I can get.
Fair enough. You know, it wouldn't be any fun if you were like,
here.
yeah, it wouldn't be any fun if you were sitting in like a shopping center parking lot or something. It's better that you're out. Yeah, we'd rather have you from somewhere a little remote and just see what happens. So that was just an amazing video. Just great work being done restoring the prairies. And obviously, we're thrilled to have you representing that crucial, really important ecosystem.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's a pleasure to represent the organization. I mean, so that video is the product of some very, very talented people I work with who help make this project a reality. So yeah, welcome everybody to American Prairie Reserve, or at least the office now anyways, but I promise it is right outside the window there. You know, I thought I would talk a little bit about, you know, North American prairies and then what American Prairie Reserve is trying to do to save them, because I think we've got kind of a good news story here as far as biodiversity is concerned. So here in kind of central Montana, where I'm located right now, in the heart of American Prairie Reserve is the kind of the seat of an ecosystem that for 13,000 years since the last ice age has been a place with very rich biodiversity where large mammals are concerned. You know, grassland images that would have rivaled something that you would see on in the African Serengeti, right? You've got bison and bighorn sheep and elk and wolves and grizzly bears and all this stuff running around. And of course, nomadic peoples living alongside that wildlife for as much as 13,000 years. And we know this because of oral tradition of the native peoples that occupied the region for more than 10,000 years, like the Ani and the Nakota tribes and many others. And we also hear this from, you know, early European accounts, things like the Lewis and Clark expedition, which described this same scene of just an absolutely wild landscape, just filled with large mammal biodiversity. And as recently as 1840, you've got people like George Catlin, famous American painter, calling for the protection of this ecosystem, calling for some kind of a nation's park to be established to protect this biodiversity in perpetuity, so that future generations would be able to enjoy this very North American scene of biodiversity. But of course, that didn't happen, unfortunately, because of overhunting, unsustainable farming, and harvesting practices, and then, of course, eradicating bison from the landscape as a tactic of war to subjugate Native Americans. We see kind of a wholesale loss of that biodiversity in this ecosystem. So much so, and for similar reasons across the globe, we get temperate grasslands, savannas, prairies, being one of the least protected ecosystem on the planet, less than 5% protection across the globe. And that's why we see these losses of biodiversity. In fact, a recent report found that there's really only 4 grassland ecosystems on the planet that are still large enough and intact enough to even warrant consideration for wholesale ecological protection. Those are the Kazakh steppe, the Mongolian steppe, the Patagonian steppe, and of course the Northern Great Plains, right here, which is where I'm talking to you from today. So American Prairie Reserve's vision is to protect that, is to restore some of that biodiversity in the Upper Missouri River region. Our mission is to create the largest nature reserve in the lower 48, a refuge for people and wildlife preserved forever as part of America's heritage. And the way we do that is we focus on this region and kind of the Upper Missouri River region of central Montana, the area surrounding the Charlie Russell National Wildlife Refuge. And we purchase ranch land when it comes up for sale, and we acquire the grazing leases to those ranches as well. And so you have a matrix of what is a considerable amount of already public land with some degree of protection for wildlife. But by purchasing these adjacent ranches, we think we can cobble together a multi-jurisdictional, multi-agency refuge, something that's never really been done before, and use that to protect biodiversity, restore biodiversity, rewild that landscape to something like it used to look like. So what we have today, as we piece this thing together, is this beautiful prairie landscape, which you might have caught a glimpse of. You saw some of it in the video there, right? Big open landscapes, and thankfully our prairie has been kept largely right side up, which is to say that the prairie wasn't tilled up for farmland or anything like that. So you have the foundations, a stable foundation of an intact ecosystem. It's just missing most of its large mammals, or they're being managed in very, very low abundances. So when it comes to something like the American bison, up until American Prairie Reserve shows up, largely unrepresented on the landscape, except for some nearby Native American Indian reservations. Things like grizzly bears completely pushed to the mountains, only exist in the Rocky Mountains, no longer exist on the prairie, despite being the endemic species of the prairie. You've got other species that have been, seen massive range reductions, whether it's pronghorn or sage grouse, things like the black-footed ferret, which were thought to be extinct for a long, long time. So despite having a largely intact habitat from that kind of grasslands perspective, the mammal biodiversity is kind of crashed. But in an interesting way, none of these species have actually gone extinct. They're either just managed at low abundance or they're extirpated, missing from the local region. And this is actually kind of reflective of the world as a whole, right? I appreciate the opportunity to speak on behalf of American Prairie Reserve at the Biodiversity Festival. And I think about biodiversity, and I'm struck by this idea that, not very long ago, as recently as 50 years ago, something like 85% of biomass on the planet. So if you put every mammal on a scale, right? People, blue whales, elephants, bison on a scale, the vast majority of that belonged to wildlife, with humans and livestock, domesticated animals, just making up a small percentage of that. But fast forward to 2018, and we see that now that scale, only 6% of the weight of all mammal weight on the planet is now represented by wild animals, with the other 94% being accounted for by humans and livestock. We've seen just an absolute decline of biodiversity, mammalian biodiversity across the entire planet. And sometimes that's not always represented just by extinction, but the loss of biomass, right? Just the reduction of these populations down to something very, very little. Now that's a sad story, but because all of these species are still intact, if not here, very nearby, American Prairie Reserve's kind of mission, design, thesis is that we can kind of put those pieces back together of the ecosystem. We can do the rewilding that will restore the biodiversity, make sure that these species are present, but not just present in nominal values, present in the abundances that they should be to actually do that ecological work. And so I'll highlight what work we do just focusing on one species, which is the bison. In 2005, American Prairie Reserve released 15 bison back onto our land. And if you fast forward today, we have a herd of about 800 bison on 3 different properties, with the goal of eventually reaching a herd of greater than 5,000 on about 3.2 million acres, an area the size of Yellowstone and Glacier National Park combined. And what that means isn't just a nominal introduction of bison back into the landscape, but a restoration of the work that bison do as a keystone species and an ecosystem engineer. We think we can put bison back to work on the landscape, managing it in a way that preserves biodiversity for other species as well. So there's a number of ways that bison do this, but I'll focus on just one. And it's this idea of kind of what is an ecosystem engineer, right? Like what does that mean? Why is a bison, despite being, America's national mammal, what makes it an ecosystem engineer? And if we think about bison as a kind of a lawnmower, right? More exciting than a lawnmower, but they're grazing the grasslands of North America. Historically would have grazed the grasslands of North America all throughout the northern Great Plains. We're talking about bison that would have numbered from like 30 to 60 million across the continent. And when bison graze, they're grazing where they think is the best place to get food at any given time. And that varies from time to time. Bison, unlike a lawnmower in your front yard, do not have the objective of managing American prairies at a nice, even, clean, as a nice, clean, even lawn. They're grazing certain areas very, very hard. They're parked in an area for one reason or another for a long time and grazing grasses all the way down to a very, very low level. Some areas they graze lightly as they move through. So you've got kind of a take half, leave half model, something similar to what we've recreated in large parts of North America with domestic cattle. And then there's other areas that just get completely missed from time to time, right? Maybe years on end with no real meaningful grazing, not from bison anyways. And so the grass is allowed to build up to a very tall level. And what that does is that kind of chaotic grazing that these bison do creates multiple different habitat types, which are very important for multiple different species. Some species, and grassland songbirds are the kind of classic example of this. Some of those species prefer that very, very short cropped grass, right? They only thrive in conditions like that. Some like the medium grazed grass, and others need ungrazed, tall, kind of like what we would think of as like rank grass, right? And what we see in the modern context, and part of the reason why we're witnessing grassland songbirds is declining faster than any other kind of clade of birds, is that the birds that like that take half, leave half, that medium grazed that we've done a very good job replicating with modern agriculture, by and large tend to be doing fine. Some are suffering from other things like climate change, but at least their habitat is intact. But all those species that rely on that really, really short, super heavy grazed grass, and all the species that rely on that very long, tall, ungrazed grass are doing incredibly poorly because we don't have any habitat left for them. So restoring bison for us isn't just about putting the national mammal back where it belongs, where people can enjoy something that looks like, a vision of a wild North America. But it's so those bison can do the work of kind of rewilding the ecosystem themselves, fulfilling that ecological role that they've occupied for at least 13,000 years, and making those grassland habitats diverse in a way that supports all other kinds of wildlife. And so I think I'll leave it at that, and just say that, again, we really appreciate the opportunity to speak. This is just an excellent idea. Kudos to you, Joe. Thanks for having us. If you want to learn more about American Prairie's mission, you can learn all about what we do at americanprairie.org. You can find links as to how to visit, how to get involved, and how to donate if you choose to help us keep this mission going. And you can find me on Twitter at Daniel Kinka, where you can ask me any questions that you're not able to ask right now. So yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. And I guess, Joe, are we able to take questions here? Is that something we can do?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Daniel, thanks for that. I know the connection didn't work for us, but we got a nice glimpse of the prairies, and you can't beat that. Awesome. Good. So we've got a great signal now. Great talk about the biodiversity. Great to hear about the really ambitious plans to get the bison back out and roaming across a nice large area. So that's always great to hear. And I think some of that's kind of on the go right now, isn't it? Isn't there kind of some transportation action, or is that still in the future?
Yeah. We've actually got a couple of my colleagues are out picking up bison from another herd right now. Thinking about, the bison do a pretty good job of growing themselves, but we're all looking to kind of bring in new bison, ship off bison to other conservation herds. So this is an ongoing thing. It doesn't ever stop. We're always trying to look to, we've got 800 bison now. That's good. That's certainly better than 0 bison. We've got, but we've got a long way to go to get bison to what I was talking about, which is that ecological, meaningful, big herds of bison that measure in the thousands, not in the hundreds.
Yeah, and just to kind of get a sense of at the beginning, was it down to 0 at one stage, or was there?
Yeah, where I'm sitting right now, I mean, absolutely, bison had been removed from the ecosystem for probably as much as 100 years. Now, I do want to be respectful. We've got some really good neighbors that are doing great conservation work and have been doing it since the 70s. And that's the Fort Belknap Indian Reservation, the Fort Peck Indian Reservation, both of which have bison herds of their own, both commodity herds and conservation herds. And they've been restoring and rewilding bison since the 70s. So we're in good company out here. But, as for American Prairie Reserve itself, what you see on the map today, those lands as recently as 2004 had no bison on them and hadn't seen bison for almost 100 years.
Yeah. So, this morning we had the Joberts join us from South Africa, and they were talking about the Okabanga Delta and just the important role that elephants play in the Delta, kind of carving paths through the long grass, which then hippos and crocs and other animals can move through. What kind of role, ecosystem services do the bison provide?
Yeah, so in addition to what I was talking about, that managing the grasslands at different habitats, bison do things like wallow, which domestic cattle don't. It's a way they kind of like roll around on their backs on the ground and create these big depressions in the landscape. That creates little miniature wetlands, which we know are important for a whole host of invertebrate and amphibian species. And we think it actually kind of changes the grassland community and the halo right around there. There's also other stories, which I don't think we have good evidence to support, but there's a lot of people that talk about, bison are very well adapted for deep snow and can actually just dig their way through it like a snowplow. You take another kind of iconic North American species like the pronghorn antelope, has almost no ability to tolerate snow. Their strategy is typically to run away from snowstorms. But so we've heard anecdotal reports. Like I said, I don't think we have good data on this, but people tell stories of bison grazing through the snow, right? Digging down and kind of plowing out, leaving a snow-free area in their wake. And things like pronghorn following behind them and having access now to the ground again, being able to graze behind the bison, whereas they have no ability to kind of dig out on their own. But if they follow right behind the bison, then they've got access to grass. So there's actually a number of ways in which bison kind of meet that definition of an ecosystem engineer and a keystone species.
Okay. So question coming in here about maybe other species. Would there or are there wolves or plans to release them if they were there in the past?
No plans. There are no wolves here now, and there are no plans to release them. I think we've seen in the past that those kind of reintroductions can be less sticky than we'd like them to be in the conservation community. The good news is, some of these animals that are missing from the ecosystem right now do seem to be trying to recolonize on their own. So the work to restore species like that can be contentious and problematic is largely human work. How do we set the stage in the human communities that surround us to make it feasible to live alongside large carnivores? And that's a big part of the work that we do here.
Yeah, I mean, that's what you have to love about nature is it is resilient. Given space, given protection, it can come back in amazing ways.
Absolutely. And we see that happening with a lot of these different species, which is just a joy to see. Some of the species we through partnerships we can think about doing more kind of facilitated migrations or direct reintroductions. We've seen that happen in the region with both swift fox and black-footed ferrets on and off for the past few decades. But with other species, we think the best way to do it is to let them recolonize on their own and just create a habitat and landscape that can accommodate that.
Yeah, try to connect some of the fragments, give them a path so that they can get into the new areas that are open to them. Very cool.
That's right.
I have to ask after the prairie dogs because we've done several events from the prairie dog colony. How are they doing? What are they up to this time of the year?
They're doing great. They're out and about. you wouldn't know it from the video that I showed earlier, but it was, I think I mentioned that it was in the 80s earlier this week. And so they're out and about, despite, kind of droughty conditions out here right now, which isn't particularly alarming. Like I said, it's always been a region of extremes, but the prairie dogs are out and about and they seem to be doing very well. I think we've actually seen some modest prairie dog growth and expansion over the last couple of years, which is exciting because I didn't go into prairie dogs, but they're the other ecosystem engineer that we have, right?
Sure.
We've done talks live from prairie dog towns. They create habitat and space and food for just an enormous number of other species on the prairie. So it's good that they're doing well. And as they continue to do better and better, we can start to think about things like black-footed ferret reintroductions. Probably the most endangered mammal in North America. It doesn't exist in the region right now at all. It exists on the Fort Belknap Indian Reservation. But the only thing stopping us from getting ferrets is having more prairie dogs. So as they continue to grow and grow in their populations, that's increasing biodiversity in a number of ways, and getting ferrets back would be kind of a cherry on the top.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That would be so cool. I think that's a really important thing to think about. We always think about big animals as changing ecosystems, elephants and bison, and because of their size. But everything has a role to play, and the prairie dog is just one of those powerhouses that creates all those habitats for other species.
Over 100 other species
Wow.
supported by prairie dogs. Yeah.
Wow, very cool. The head office, where is that located? How far are you from, somewhere someone could point to a map, like a larger city or something?
Yeah, sure. I should have. Can I still do a screen share here? Let me see if I can just pull up a quick map
let's get a perspective.
That I think would be a great idea. So let me see if I can pull this up real quick, and that'll give the audience some idea of where we are. Just a moment. Are you seeing that, Joe?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So what you can see here is this is a bounding box that gives you an idea of where we're located within the state of Montana, right? And you can see the dark, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but the dark green there would be the Charlie Russell National Wildlife Refuge, the lighter green being the Upper Missouri River Breaks. And then if I jump to this picture, we're kind of zoomed into that bounding box. And now what you see again is part of that CMR refuge in the Upper Missouri River Breaks National Monument. But you can also see in the kind of dark green and the sage green, these are the properties that represent American Prairie Reserve as it exists today. The dark green being deeded land that we own outright, and the kind of limey green being the land that we lease. Total, that's about 400,000 acres right at this point. 100,000 acres of deeded and about 300,000 acres of leased land.
Wow. Yeah, nice chunk of land, and I imagine there's going to be opportunities to expand.
That's what we hope. Yeah, as I mentioned, the goal is to get to something like 3.2 million acres, which is big, which is a very ambitious goal. But that's what we think we need to support the kind of diversity that we need on the prairie. It's a landscape the size of Yellowstone and Glacier National Parks combined, or about the size of the state of Connecticut. So you're talking about a very big region. But when we're talking about prairie species, allowing bison to do that chaotic grazing I was talking about, allowing some of these kind of forces that shape the prairie in the first place to find some foothold of being reestablished, doing things like controlled burning and allowing for droughts to take place the way they would naturally. You really need quite a lot of space. Prairies are places that have kind of always favored a kind of a nomadic lifestyle, whether it's people or whether it's wildlife. So in order to make it work, in order to make it not just nominal, not just an outdoor zoo, but an actually intact ecosystem, we need to think about going very big.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the time for conservation is now, and that's what we should be thinking in terms of big ideas, big plans. And I mean, it's better to try, right? Always better to try and push and make things happen. And I think it's easy to be pleasantly surprised.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And the audience can help us do that by spreading the word and coming out to visit if it's within their means, and even considering donations. This is all philanthropically driven work. So we can do more with more support.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll be making a donation after the festival. We've been collecting a nice general fund for many of the groups of our speakers. So yeah, we'll definitely contribute to that. So definitely think about heading to the website, contributing to the general fund, or going right to American Prairie Reserve if you like the work that they're doing, and just boom, direct right in their box. All right. Well, Daniel, thanks so much for connecting with us. Enjoy the rest of your time up there. I know you're there for a couple more days. And thanks so much for bringing the prairie ecosystem to the Global Biodiversity Festival.
My pleasure, Joe. Thank you again for having me, and thanks for doing this. I'm looking forward to tuning into the rest of the program.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Daniel.